The year 1809 began for me at Hodgenville, Kentucky, in the quiet of an unremarkable household. I remember hewn logs most clearly, the world soft and unhurried around me, the days unfolding slowly. You need not follow every word that follows. Let your eyes close whenever they wish, and simply rest here with me as the story unfolds. The winter wind pressed against the rough walls of that one-room log cabin, finding its way through the chinks where the clay had not yet settled. It was a frontier childhood, defined by the smell of woodsmoke and the taste of cold air that bit at the cheeks. Before the hearth fire could warm them, my father moved with a deliberate slowness, his hands calloused from years of shaping the earth and the timber that sheltered us. He spoke little, but his presence was a steady anchor in a life that often felt as shifting as the soil we tilled. The birth of a child in such a place was not marked by fanfare or ceremony, but by the quiet acceptance of life, continuing despite the harshness of the land. I recall the texture of the floorboards beneath, bare feet worn smooth by the passage of many days and the weight of simple living. The light in the cabin changed with the seasons, shifting from the pale gray of a Kentucky winter morning to the golden warmth of a summer afternoon that stretched the shadows long across the dirt floor. There was a rhythm to the days that required no clock, governed instead by the rising sun and the setting of the stars. We ate when the work was done, and we slept when the light failed live. Our bodies attuned to the natural cycles of the land. The silence of those early years was not empty cliff, but filled with the sounds of the forest outside, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the soft creak of the cabin settling into the earth. It was a world where time moved at the pace of growth and decay, where patience was the only currency that held value. I learned to listen to the wind before it spoke, to feel the change in the air before the storm broke. This sensitivity to the environment became a part of the way I saw the world, a way of understanding that was rooted in observation rather than theory. The simple objects of that cabin held a significance that grew with the passing years. A wooden bowl, a clay cup, a rough spun blanket. Each carried the memory of I've, the hands that made them and the lives they sustained. There was a profound dignity in this simplicity, a clarity of purpose that stripped away the unnecessary and left only what was essential. The air inside the cabin often smelled of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, mixed with the scent of the earth and the smoke from the fire. It was a smell that stayed with me long after I left that place, a reminder of the roots that held me. Even I did live as I moved through a world of greater complexity. The frontier cold was a constant companion, a reminder of the fragility of life and the strength required to endure it. We huddled together for warmth, our breath visible in the still air, finding comfort in the shared heat of our bodies. The winter wind howled outside, but inside, the fire provided a sanctuary, a small circle of light and warmth in the vast darkness of the night. These early experiences shaped a resilience that would serve me well in the years to come, a quiet strength that did not need to be shouted to be felt. The memory of those days remains vivid, not as a series of dramatic events, but as a collection of sensory impressions that formed the foundation of a life. Leave The feel of the rough bark of the trees, the sound of the river flowing nearby, the sight of the stars stretching across the sky in an endless arc. These were the things that mattered most, the simple truths that anchored the spirit when the world seemed too heavy to bear. The year 1809 was not a beginning of greatness, but a beginning of being, a time when the world was new and full of possibility, waiting to be understood. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a soft, pulsing ember, casting long, rhythmic shadows against the rough, hewn walls of this quiet room. The only sound is the gentle crackle of the dying wood and the distant, steady rhythm of rain tapping against the glass, a soft percussion that has lived, accompanied my thoughts for many nights. There is no urgency here, no call to the cabinet, no telegram demanding immediate action. Only the heavy, comforting weight of silence that allows the mind to drift back through the long corridors of memory. I sit in this chair, feeling the worn velvet beneath my hands, and the air is cool, carrying the faint scent of old paper and wood smoke. It is a moment of stillness where the noise of the world fades, leaving only the internal landscape, a vast terrain of choices made and paths taken, all viewed now with the calm detachment of a dreamer looking back on a life lived in the shadow of great events. My story begins not in a palace or a grand hall, but in a small, one-room cabin of hewn logs in Kentucky, where the winter wind howled through the chinks in the walls. I was born on a cold February morning in 1809 to a father who was a man of few words, but great endurance, and a mother whose kindness was the first light I ever knew. We moved often, seeking better soil, better land, better chances, settling finally in Indiana, where the forests were dense and the winters harsh. Life was a constant struggle against the elements, a daily battle to clear the earth and plant the seed that might feed us through the coming months. I remember the physical labor of those years, the calluses on my hands, the ache in my muscles as I worked the fields from dawn until the light failed. Yet, in the evenings, there was a different kind of work that fed the spirit, a quiet hunger for words that could not be sated by bread alone. The floorboards were rough under my bare feet, and the air inside the cabin always carried the smell of damp earth and burning hickory. My father was a man of the soil, his hands cracked and stained with the dark mud of the fields, while my mother moved with a gentle grace that seemed to soften the harshness of our surroundings. She taught me to listen to the stories of the world, to find meaning in the simple things that others might overlook. When she spoke, her voice was a low hum that wove through the darkness, filling the small space with a warmth that no fire could provide. She read to me from a few tattered books, her fingers tracing the lines of text as if they were sacred maps leading to a better place. Those moments were the foundation of everything I would become, a quiet seed planted in the rocky ground of my early years. We lived in a world where survival was the primary goal, where every day brought new challenges and uncertainties. The winter nights were long and cold, the frost forming intricate patterns on the inside of the small windows. I would sit by the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker, imagining places far away from the log cabin and the endless fields. The stories I heard were not just tales of the past, but visions of a future that might be different, a world where words could change the course of history. My father believed in the value of hard work and the dignity of labor. that built a life from nothing. He showed me how to split wood, how to plow the fields, how to build a shelter that would stand against the storm. These lessons were etched into my bones, a part of me that would never fade, no matter how high I climbed or how far I traveled. There was a time when I felt the weight of failure pressing down on me, a heavy burden that made my shoulders ache and my spirit falter. I had moved to Springfield, a young man with little money and many debts, trying to make a name for myself in the world of law. The streets were muddy, the air thick, with the smell of horses and coal smoke, and the people I met were often skeptical of a stranger from the backwoods. I walked the roads with my saddlebags heavy on my back, feeling the isolation of a man who had not yet found his place. The nights were long and lonely, filled with thoughts of what might go wrong, and the fear of never being able to pay what I owed. It was a time of deep melancholy, of a darkness that seemed to swallow the light of hope. Then came the day when Joshua Speed, a man with a kind face and a generous heart, offered me a room and a double bed to share. He had seen the sadness in my eyes, the weariness in my step, and he offered a solution without asking for anything in return. I picked up my saddlebags and went upstairs, setting them on the floor with a sense of relief I had not felt in months. When I came back down, my face was beaming, and I announced my acceptance with a joy that surprised even myself. That shared room became a symbol of the human connections that would sustain me through many years of hardship and responsibility. It was a place of rest, a sanctuary where I could lay down the weight of the world and simply be. The stability I found in that friendship allowed me to focus on the monumental tasks that lay ahead, to build a life that would endure long after I was gone. The room itself was simple, with a single bed and a small table, where I could write my letters and read my books. The walls were bare, but the atmosphere was filled with a sense of peace that I had never known before. Speed was a man of few words, but his presence was a constant source of comfort, a reminder that I was not alone in the struggle. We talked of many things, of politics and law, of the future of the nation, and the meaning of freedom. These conversations shaped my thinking, broadening my horizons and deepening my understanding of the world. They were the foundation of a friendship that would last a lifetime, a bond that would withstand the tests of time and the pressures of leadership. The legacy of these relationships is as important as if the words I wrote and the laws I shaped live. They remind us that even the greatest leaders needed moments of rest and the comfort of trusted friends. The quiet support of those around me enabled me to achieve what history remembers as my greatest works. It was in those small moments of connection that I found the strength to carry the hopes of a divided nation on my shoulders. The ability to form deep bonds with others remained a constant source of strength throughout my life, a light that guided me through the darkest times. A heavy oak desk sits near the window, its surface worn smooth by years of correspondence and legal work. Soft light from a single tallow candle illuminates the scattered papers and inkwell resting upon the wood. The room smells faintly of beeswax and old leather, creating an atmosphere of calm and focused thought. Outside, the night air is still, and the only sound is the distant hoot of an owl in the trees. This simple space held the weight of a nation, yet remained a place of personal reflection and rest. The shadows dance gently on the walls as live. The flame flickers in the draft from the chimney. It was here that I found moments of peace away from the demands of the White House. The room stands as a silent witness to the private struggles and quiet triumphs of a great leader. The historical record preserves 5 known copies of the Gettysburg Address written in my own hand. Scholars examine these manuscripts to understand the evolution of my most famous oration and the care I took with its wording. The Nicolay copy is believed to be the horse I rented carried all my worldly goods in a saddlebag that smelled of leather and damp wool, a small bundle of life packed tight for the journey to Springfield. 6 weeks after I was admitted to the bar, I arrived in that town on a spring day in 1837, hoping to find a corner of the world where I could build something lasting. I had already spoken with a carpenter who promised to build me a single bedstead, a simple frame of wood that would hold me through the long nights of a new beginning. The room I rented was small, barely large enough for the bed and a chair, yet it felt like a palace compared to the open fields I had left behind. Joshua Speed, a man with a kind face and steady hands, became my neighbor and my friend during those first uncertain years. He knew that I had served 2 terms in the state legislature, though my name was not yet famous beyond the local circuit. Speed had heard me speak in a celebrated debate years before we met, and he saw a man who struggled to find his footing in a world that moved too fast. We shared a room above his store, a space filled with the smell of dry goods and the faint scent of tobacco smoke. A single candle burned on the table, its light flickering against the walls. As we talked late into the night, we discussed the law and the politics of the region, our voices low and measured in the quiet of the evening. The bed was wide enough for 2, and we lay side by side, listening to the sounds of the city settling down around us. It was a time of deep conversation and shared silence, where the weight of the world felt lighter when carried together. Eventually, the carpenter finished the bedstead, and I moved into my own quarters, a small step toward the life I was trying to construct. I established my practice in that small office, arguing cases with a clarity that came from years of listening to the stories of others. The law became my craft, a tool for understanding the human condition through the lens of justice and fairness. I traveled the circuit courts across the state, riding from town to town, sleeping in inns, and eating meals with strangers who became friends. The roads were rough, and the weather was often harsh, but the work was good and the people were real. I argued cases before judges and juries, presenting my points with a logic that cut through the confusion of the moment. My reputation grew slowly, built on a foundation of honesty and a deep respect for the rules that held society together. I married Mary Todd, a woman of sharp mind and strong will, and we started a family in the midst of a changing world. The years in Springfield were a time of great growth, both for the man I was becoming and for the nation that watched from the distance. The quiet life of the frontier had taught me patience and resilience, lessons that would serve me well when the storm finally broke. I remained grounded in my values, even as the tensions over slavery began to tear the country apart. The simple log cabin of my birth stood as a reminder of where I came from, a place of hard work and limited resources. That small space was filled with hope, a belief that a better future could be built from the soil and the sweat of the brow. The journey from that cabin to the highest office in the land was long and filled with obstacles that tested the limits of endurance, yet I never forgot. The lessons learned in those early years, the value of a promise kept, and the power of a word spoken with truth. The forest and the fields had shaped me, giving me a voice that could speak to the common people in a language they understood. The room where I drafted many of my letters was a modest space filled with the quiet dust of the late afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains to illuminate the grain of the wooden desk, a surface worn smooth by the passage of time and the weight of my thoughts. A single inkwell sat near the edge, its dark surface reflecting the dim light of the window. A pool of black waiting to give form to the ideas in my mind. The air smelled faintly of old paper, and the beeswax used to seal the envelopes, a scent that reminded me of the letters sent and the words received. My pen moved slowly across the page, leaving a trail of black ink that dried quickly in the stillness, a physical record of the mental struggle. Outside, the sounds of the city faded into a gentle hum that did not disturb the concentration required for such work. The chair I sat in was worn smooth by years of use, the wood shaped by the weight of my body and the burden of my thoughts. A stack of legal briefs rested on the floor beside me, waiting for my attention, their pages crisp and full of arguments yet to be made. The walls were bare save for a small map of the state that hung crookedly near the door, a reminder of the vast territory I had traveled and the people I had served. Shadows lengthened across the floorboards as the day drew to a close, casting long, dark shapes that seemed to stretch toward the future. I paused occasionally to dip the pen again, leave the scratch of the nib the only sound in the room, a rhythmic counterpoint to the silence. The texture of the paper was rough under my fingers, providing a tactile connection to the work that demanded so much of my mind. I adjusted my spectacles and leaned forward to read the words I had just written, searching for the clarity that eluded me in the first draft. The silence of the room seemed to wrap around me like a warm blanket, a shield against the chaos that waited outside. I felt a sense of calm as the words took shape on the page, a small victory in a life often defined by struggle. The separation between the craft of law and the craft of writing was never truly distinct in my mind, for both required precision, logic, and a deep respect for the power of language. My influence on American prose remains profound, despite my lack of formal artistic training, a testament to the idea that great writing can emerge from a life of practical experience. I demonstrated that the words of a lawyer could carry the same weight as the words of a poet, if only they were spoken with truth and purpose. The simplicity of my style belied the complexity of the ideas I sought to convey, a trick of the trade that allowed me to reach the hearts of the people. I used metaphors drawn from rural life to make abstract concepts accessible to a broad audience, turning the dry laws of the land into stories that everyone could understand. This approach made my words resonate deeply with the common people of my time, who saw their own struggles reflected in the arguments I presented. My legacy as a writer endures because of the clarity and moral weight of my prose, a body of work that continues to inspire readers and scholars alike. During our initial conversation, I expressed deep sadness about potentially failing in my legal experiment and never being able to pay my debts, a moment of vulnerability that revealed the personal struggles behind the public face. Joshua Speed offered me a room and a double bed to share after observing my melancholy, a simple act of kindness that changed the course of my life. Moved by my visitor's sadness, Speed suggested a solution that would provide comfort and companionship during a difficult time, a reminder that even the strongest men need a friend. Without saying a word, I picked up the candle and followed him to the room above the store, where the light of a single flame would guide us through the long nights of our shared history. The existence of multiple versions of my speeches demonstrates that I viewed the address as a living document rather than a fixed text, a belief that the message must remain clear and powerful for every generation. George Bancroft and other institutions hold these precious documents, a testament to the president's generosity and his belief in the power of education to lift the human spirit. Each copy serves as a unique artifact that tells a story about the reception and legacy of the speech, a record of the words that shaped a nation. The source text does not contain any information regarding the road to the Capitol stretched long and gray, a ribbon of mud that seemed to pull the very soul from the earth beneath our wheels. I traveled in February of that year, a slow procession moving through lands that had already turned their backs on the Union, their silence heavier than any shout. The train cars rattled over the iron tracks, a rhythmic clatter that matched the beating of a heart unsure of its own rhythm. Hostile eyes watched from the windows of small towns, faces pressed against the glass like ghosts seeking entry to a world they no longer recognized. There was fear in the air, a cold draft that slipped through the cracks of the car, carrying the scent of wet wool and unspoken threats. Yet the journey continued, 1 mile after another, marked by the changing colors of the sky, from a bruised purple to a pale, watery blue. I learned then that patience was not merely a virtue but a necessary tool, a way to hold the pieces of a fractured nation together without letting them shatter further. The young men who walked beside me, apprentices to the art of governance, watched how I listened to every voice, even those that spoke with venom. They saw that integrity did not require a loud voice, but a steady hand and a willingness to hear the truth in the words of an enemy. These observers would go on to serve the country in ways they could not yet imagine, carrying the lessons of that difficult winter into the halls of power for decades to come. Their time under my guidance was brief, measured in weeks rather than years, yet it shaped the next generation of public servants who would inherit the burden of a reunited land. The legacy of those quiet conversations in the dining car of a moving train extended far beyond the final gunshots of the conflict, rippling through the history of a people learning to live together again. A quiet room in a mid-19th century home offered a sanctuary from the political storms outside. Soft light filtered through heavy velvet curtains that hung from polished brass rods, casting a warm amber glow over the worn floorboards. The walls were covered in patterned wallpaper featuring small, repeating floral motifs in muted greens and creams, a design that seemed to breathe with the slow rhythm of the house. A wooden desk stood near the window, its surface worn smooth by years of use, the wood darkened by the oils of countless hands and the ink of 1,000 letters. Inkwells and quill pens rested in a small ceramic holder beside a stack of blank paper. Live, waiting for the words that would define a nation's future. The air smelled faintly of beeswax candles and dried lavender placed in a small porcelain dish, a scent that clung to the clothes and the hair of those who entered. Outside the window, the garden remained still under the weight of a gentle evening mist, the leaves of the trees glistening with a silent promise of rain. Shadows lengthened slowly across the floorboards as the sun dipped below the horizon, stretching the shapes of the furniture into long, distorted forms that danced on the walls. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked with a steady, rhythmic sound that filled the silence, a metronome for the thoughts that raced through the mind. The room felt safe and enclosed, a place where thoughts could settle without disturbance, where the weight of the world could be set down for a moment. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light that pierced the darkness near the desk, tiny particles suspended in the air, like memories waiting to be recalled. This space represented a moment of calm within the broader narrative of a nation at war, a small island of peace in a sea of chaos. The objects within it spoke of daily life continuing despite the turmoil beyond the walls, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the simple acts of writing and reading remained possible. The nation stood on the brink, there I did live, of profound division during those early months, the fabric of the country, tearing along deep sectional lines that had been present for decades. Slavery was the wound that would not heal, a festering sore that threatened to consume the whole body of the republic. As I assumed the office of the presidency, the country fractured, states pulling away like stones from a crumbling wall. The political environment remained tense, a powder keg waiting for a single spark to ignite a fire that would consume everything in its path. Southern states seceded from the Union before my official inauguration, leaving a hollow space in the government that no amount of rhetoric could fill. War clouds gathered over the capital, dark and heavy, promising a storm that would test the limits of democracy and the endurance of the American people. The documents available today help reconstruct the atmosphere of fear and hope that defined the times, showing a leader walking a tightrope over an abyss. I understood that unity required patience and a willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints with genuine interest, a difficult task when the opposing view was the right to own another human being. The pressure of leadership was immense, a weight that pressed down on the shoulders and the mind. Yet I managed to maintain a sense of humor and humanity in the face of such adversity. It was a strange alchemy, mixing the grim reality of war with the simple joy of a well-told joke, a way to keep the soul from hardening. The apprentices and young associates learned from this example, seeing that a leader could be stern in purpose but gentle in spirit. They observed how the immense pressures of the moment did not crush the capacity for kindness, nor did the darkness of the times extinguish the light of hope. Noted historian George Bancroft made a request for a copy of an address on behalf of his stepson, Alexander Bliss, who was publishing a volume of manuscripts. This request led to the creation of a specific version of the address that would eventually find its way to New York, a document that would outlive the war itself. The Hay copy remained largely unknown in the papers of John Hay until 1909, when it was first published, tucked away among other documents. Like why? Waiting for historians to discover its significance. The delay in its publication meant that scholars worked with other versions for many years before understanding the full scope of the revisions made in those quiet moments of reflection. I created 3 additional copies of the address after November of that year, specifically for charitable purposes, intending to raise funds for the Union cause and support the families of the soldiers who had fallen. These later versions were written with a clear intention, a desire to turn words into action and memory into aid for those left behind. In addition to the copy requested by the historian, other institutions hold these precious documents, each one a unique artifact that tells a story about the reception and legacy of the words spoken in a field in Gettysburg. The Cornell University Library preserves one of these copies as a testament to the belief in the power of education and the enduring nature of the ideals expressed. Each copy serves as a unique artifact that tells a story about the reception and legacy of the address, a physical reminder of a moment when the nation looked at itself and saw a new possibility. The title of a book collection does not contain the actual letters or addresses within it, yet the memory of the words remains etched in the minds of those who heard them and those who read them later. Despite the lack of specific details about the sleep patterns of that time, the resilience of the spirit remains a testament to the character of the man who led. The White House Library held a quiet stillness during the early hours of the morning, a time when the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Sunlight filtered softly through the heavy velvet curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. A large mahogany desk stood in the center of the room, its surface worn smooth by years of use, bearing the marks of a life dedicated to the service of others. Upon the desk rested a single inkwell and a stack of papers waiting for attention, the dark liquid ready to receive the thoughts of a tired mind. The shelves behind the desk were lined with leather, bound volumes of poetry and history, their spines cracked and faded, holding the wisdom of ages past. The air smelled faintly of old paper and beeswax from the polished floorboards, a scent that evoked a sense of continuity and permanence. Outside the window, the gardens were silent and covered in a layer of morning dew, the grass glistening under the pale light of dawn. A single bird sang a soft melody that drifted through the open pane of glass, a simple song that seemed to offer comfort in the midst of chaos. The room felt suspended in time, a sanctuary of peace amidst the chaos of war, a place where the burdens of the nation could be set down for a moment. Lincoln often sat in the high backed chair by the window, gazing out at the quiet grounds, finding a moment of respite from the relentless demands of the office. The journey from Springfield to Washington began as a slow procession through a land holding its breath, the winter air biting at cheeks, while the train rattled over tracks that seemed to stretch into an infinite gray horizon. I watched the familiar hills of Illinois fade behind the smoke of the engine live, leaving a home that felt suddenly small against the vast, gathering storm of a nation fracturing along lines drawn in blood and belief. The capital waited with a nervous energy, the streets filled with soldiers and spies, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and unwashed bodies as factions whispered of secession and war. It was a time when every shadow held a potential threat, and the weight of the office settled onto shoulders that had only known the rough timber of a frontier cabin. I walked the corridors of the White House late into the night, the floorboards creaking under my boots, seeking clarity in the silence that followed the departure of the day's frantic messengers. The telegraph office became a second home, a place where the rhythmic tapping of keys translated the chaos of distant battlefields into a language of dots and dashes that could be understood by a tired mind. I would stand there for hours, watching the paper tape unspool, reading reports of troop movements and supply lines that determined the fate of thousands, feeling the pulse of the nation beat through those mechanical clicks. The loss of Willie in that cold February of 1862 carved a hollow space within the house that no amount of political maneuvering could ever fill, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the echoes of laughter from the nursery. His small bed remained untouched, live, a ghost of a child who had known only the warmth of a mother's hand before the fever took him, and the grief was a heavy coat worn constantly, even when the sun shone on the lawns of the executive mansion. Elizabeth Edwards came to Washington to hold the hands of a grieving wife, her presence a quiet anchor in a sea of turmoil, bringing the scent of fresh linens and the soft rustle of skirts that reminded the house of domestic life. She stayed for months, offering a sanctuary of normalcy, where Mary could weep without the eyes of the nation watching, where the pain of a mother's loss could be shared between women who understood the fragility of life. The rooms in the White House felt different after that winter, the air heavier, the light softer, as if the house itself was mourning alongside us, holding the memory of the boy who had run through these halls with such boundless energy. I often retreated to the library, sitting in a high-backed chair with a book open but unread, staring into the fire as the flames danced in patterns that held no meaning other than the simple beauty of their movement. The war demanded decisions that cut deep into the conscience, choices between mercy and necessity, between the law of the land and the higher law of humanity, and each one left a mark on the soul that could not be erased. I learned to walk the grounds of the estate at dawn, the mist clinging to the grass, the dew soaking the hem of my coat, finding a strange peace in the rhythm of my own footsteps as I tried to make sense of the conflict, tearing the country apart. The generals would come to discuss strategy, their maps spread across the table, their voices sharp with urgency. But I listened for the silence between their words, looking for the truth that lay beyond the immediate tactical need. I believed that honesty was the only foundation upon which a divided nation could be rebuilt, even when that honesty required me to admit my own fears or to acknowledge the terrible cost of every order given. The Gettysburg Address was not written in a flash of inspiration, but born from the quiet hours of reflection. The words formed in the mind long before they were spoken to a crowd of grieving citizens in a Pennsylvania town. I carried the draft in my pocket, the paper worn soft from handling, the ink slightly smudged from the journey, a testament to the simple act of writing that could change the course of history. The Library of Congress now holds the earliest copies of those words, preserved in glass cases, where the light catches the texture of the paper and the faint indentation of the pen, allowing future generations to trace the handwriting of a man who sought to bind the wounds of a nation. Historians still debate the exact moment the text was finalized, whether it was on the train or in the quiet of a hotel room, but the uncertainty does not diminish the power of the message that emerged from that time of great sorrow. The newspapers of the day captured the shock of the assassination with headlines that screamed of a nation's despair, the ink still wet on the pages that reported the fall of a leader who had guided the country through its darkest hours. The Evening Star printed the news on a Saturday morning, the date etched in memory as the day the dream of a united peace was shattered by a single bullet in a theater box. The funeral train that carried my body back to Springfield was a slow procession of mourning, the tracks lined with thousands of people who had never seen me, but felt the weight of their loss in their hearts. The Cleveland Leader documented the journey, describing the flags at half-mast and the silence that fell over every town the train passed through, a silence that spoke of a shared grief that transcended political division. The 5 handwritten copies of the address remain as physical evidence of a moment when words were chosen with care, each one a unique artifact of a leader trying to find the right path forward. The Nicolay copy, kept by my secretary until his death, shows the earliest thoughts, the corrections and changes that reveal the mind at work, shaping the language to fit the gravity of the occasion. Edward Everett, who spoke before me that day, asked for a copy to sell for the Union cause, and I gave him one, knowing that the words belonged to the nation rather than to any single man. The relationship with my secretaries was one of trust and mutual respect. John Nicolay and John Hay working side by side with me, learning the art of leadership through observation and quiet conversation. They watched how I handled the pressure of war, how I maintained a sense of humor even in the face of tragedy, and how I treated former enemies with a dignity that often disarmed their hostility. The young men who served in the White House went on to shape the future of the country, carrying with them the lessons of integrity and patience they had learned from a man who believed that the best way to win an enemy was to make them a friend. The legacy of those years is not just in the laws passed or the battles won, but in the quiet moments of connection that bridged the divide between opposing sides of a fractured society. The nation moved forward from the ashes of war toward a future that was uncertain, but full of hope, guided by the memory of a leader who had seen the worst of humanity and still believed in the best. The documents from that era serve as a bridge between the past and the present, allowing us to understand the weight of the decisions made during those critical years and the courage it took to make them. The story of this period is one of loss and resilience, a testament to the enduring power of democratic ideals when tested by the fires of conflict. The quiet moments of rest and the loud moments of conflict are both part of the same narrative, woven together into a tapestry that tells the story of a people finding their way through the darkness, the memory of the leader, remains a guiding light for those who seek to heal the divisions of the past, a reminder that unity requires patience and a live willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints with genuine interest. The historical record stands as a testament to the enduring nature of the human spirit, capable of rising above the worst of circumstances to build a better world for those who come after. A heavy oak desk sits near the window, its surface worn smooth by years of correspondence and legal work, the wood dark and rich with the patina of time. Soft light from a single tallow candle illuminates the scattered papers and inkwell resting upon the wood, the flame flickering gently in the draught from the chimney. The room smells faintly of beeswax and old leather, creating an atmosphere of calm and focused thought that seems to hold the silence of the night in its walls. Outside, the night air is still, and the only sound is the distant hoot of an owl in the trees, a rhythmic call that echoes through the darkness like a heartbeat. This simple space held the weight of a nation, yet remained a place of personal reflection and rest, a sanctuary where the mind could wander, free from the demands of the day. The shadows dance gently on the walls as the flame flickers, casting shapes that shift and change with the movement of the air, a silent performance for the solitary thinker. It was here that peace was found, away from the noise of the capital, a quiet corner where the struggles of the world could be laid down for a moment of stillness. The room stands as a silent witness to the private triumphs and quiet sorrows of a life dedicated to the service of others, a place where the soul could rest before the dawn broke again. The dust motes float in the beam of light, suspended in the air like the journey to the capital began in the gray light of a cold February morning, long before the sun had fully warmed the frost on the ground. I stepped out of the small brick house in Springfield, leaving behind the quiet streets where neighbors had gathered to offer their farewells and their fears. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of woodsmoke and the damp earth of early spring. A heavy trunk sat on the platform, marked clearly with my name and the address of the executive mansion, tied and labeled by a neighbor who understood the weight of the task. Jameson Jenkins, a man of great dignity and quiet strength, had handled the luggage with a care that spoke of deep respect. He knew that this trunk contained not just clothes and papers, but the fragile hope of a nation. Standing on a knife's edge, the train waited with its steam hissing softly, a rhythmic sound that seemed to mimic the beating of a nervous heart. I boarded with a sense of duty that felt heavier than the winter coat I wore, aware that every mile traveled was a mile away from the only home I had ever known. The political environment remained tense as southern states had already seceded from the Union before I even reached the station. War clouds gathered over the capital, casting a long shadow over the future of the federal government and the lives of millions. I understood that unity required patience and a willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints with genuine interest, even when those views were sharp enough to cut. Apprentices and young associates learned from my example of integrity, live, and quiet determination in the face of such overwhelming adversity. They observed how I managed the immense pressures of leadership without losing my sense of humor or my humanity, even when the news from the front lines was grim. Many of these young men went on to serve the nation in various capacities. After the war ended, carrying with them the lessons of that difficult time, their experiences under my mentorship influenced the next generation of American leaders and public servants, shaping the character of the administration throughout the war years. The legacy of these relationships extended far beyond the duration of my presidency and the Civil War itself, creating a network of trust that would live the country together when it tried to fall apart. The room where I often sought refuge was a simple space, yet it held the weight of a nation within its four walls. A heavy oak desk sat near the window, its surface worn smooth by years of correspondence and legal work, the wood polished by the friction of countless pens and the pressure of my own hands. Soft light from a single tallow candle illuminated the scattered papers, and the inkwell resting upon the wood, casting a warm, flickering glow against the dark grain. The room smelled faintly of beeswax and old leather, creating an atmosphere of calm and focused thought that seemed to shield me from the chaos outside. Outside, the night air was still, and the only sound was the distant hoot of an owl in the trees, a lonely call that echoed through the silence. This simple space held the weight of a nation, yet remained a place of personal reflection and rest, a sanctuary where the mind could find a moment of peace. The shadows danced gently on the walls as the flame flickered in the draft from the chimney, a slow, hypnotic movement that invited the thoughts to settle. It was here that I found moments of peace away from the demands of the White House, where the noise of the cabinet and the whispers of spies could not reach. The room stands as a silent witness to the private struggles and quiet triumphs of a great leader, a place where the decisions of war were weighed against the value of a single life. The air in the room was always cool, carrying the scent of the candle and the dry dust of old books, a smell that became as familiar to me as the sound of my own voice. The nation stood on the brink of profound division during the early months of the 19th century, a time when the fabric of the country seemed ready to tear apart at the seams. I assumed the presidency as the country fractured along deep sectional lines regarding slavery, a conflict that had been building for decades and now threatened to consume everything. My inaugural journey from Springfield to Washington took place between February and late February in 1861, a long travel through hostile territories that marked the beginning of a tumultuous era for the federal government. The political environment remained tense as southern states seceded from the Union before my official inauguration, leaving the capital isolated and vulnerable to the storms of war. War clouds gathered over the capital, testing the limits of democracy and the endurance of the American people, forcing them to choose between the old ways and a new, uncertain future. The documents available today help reconstruct the atmosphere of fear and hope that defined the times, painting a picture of a nation holding its breath. A quiet room in a mid-19th century home offered a sanctuary from the political storms outside. A place where the mind could rest for a moment. Soft light filtered through heavy velvet curtains that hung from polished brass rods, muting the harshness of the daylight and creating a soft, golden haze. The walls were covered in patterned wallpaper featuring small, repeating floral motifs in muted greens and creams, a gentle reminder of the domestic life that continued despite the turmoil. A wooden desk stood near the window, its surface worn smooth by years of use, bearing the marks of 1,000 decisions and 1,000,000 worries. Inkwells and quill pens rested in a small ceramic holder beside a stack of blank paper ready to capture the thoughts that raced through the mind. The air smelled faintly of beeswax candles and dried lavender placed in a small porcelain dish, a scent that brought a sense of order and calm to the chaos. Outside the window, the garden remained still under the weight of a gentle evening mist, the plants silent and still in the twilight. Shadows lengthened slowly across the floorboards as the sun dipped below the horizon, marking the passage of time in a world that felt like it was moving too fast. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked with a steady, rhythmic sound that filled the silence, a constant reminder that time was moving forward regardless of the struggles within. The room felt safe and enclosed, a place where thoughts could settle without disturbance, allowing the mind to find clarity amidst the confusion. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light that pierced the darkness near the desk, a slow, graceful movement that seemed to have no purpose other than to exist. This space represented a moment of calm within the broader narrative of a nation at war, a small island of peace in a sea of conflict. The objects within it spoke of daily life continuing despite the turmoil beyond the walls, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The assassination of Lincoln marked a turning point in American history that resonated for generations, a moment of sudden violence that shattered the fragile peace of the war's end. The search for truth about the event continues through the examination of surviving documents and artifacts, pieces of a puzzle that must be put together to understand the full picture. The Cleveland Leader article about the funeral train provides details on the national mourning process, describing the long journey that carried the body of the fallen leader back to his home. These records help historians understand the scale of the public grief that followed the president's death, a grief that swept across the country like a tidal wave. The political environment of the time was defined by the struggle to rebuild a fractured nation, a task that required patience, wisdom, and an unyielding commitment to the ideals of freedom. Lincoln's legacy endured through the laws and amendments passed during and after my administration, shaping the future of the country for decades to come. The historical record remains incomplete in some areas, yet the available facts provide a clear picture of the era, a picture of a man who walked through fire and never flinched. The journey from Springfield to Washington in 1861 set the stage for the challenges that lay ahead, a journey that began in hope and ended in tragedy. The war that followed tested the resolve of the nation, pushing it to the brink of collapse and then pulling it back from the edge. Oh. A soft breeze moved through the garden with a gentle, rhythmic sigh, rustling the dry grass near the path without disturbing the heavy stone walls. The silence here felt complete and unbroken by any human voice or sudden sound, a silence that seemed to hold the memory of 1,000 unsaid words. Time seemed to slow down within this enclosed space of memory and reflection, allowing the mind to revisit the past with a new clarity. The garden held its breath as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, a daily ritual that marked the passage of time in a world that felt like it was changing too fast. The war continued to demand attention despite the heavy burden of personal loss, a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. I reviewed dispatches late into the night, while the rest of the city slept, the only light coming from the flickering flame of a single oil lamp. My mind remained sharp even as my body showed signs of deep fatigue. A testament to the will that kept me moving forward. The struggle to maintain hope for the Union consumed my waking hours entirely, leaving little room for rest or reflection. I sought comfort in the company of friends who understood the depth of my pain, men who shared the burden of leadership and the weight of the nation's fate. John Hay and Robert Todd Lincoln were at the White House on the evening I was shot, their faces etched with worry and fear. They rushed to my side at the Peterson house where I lay dying, their hands holding mine as the end approached. John Hay remained with me during my final hours at the Peterson house, watching silently as the great man breathed his last breath. The room was small and dimly lit by a single oil lamp that flickered softly, casting long shadows against the walls. The train carried me toward a destiny that no one could fully foresee, moving through the dark with a sense of duty that transcended my own personal suffering. The wheels rolled over the iron rails with a steady, hypnotic rhythm that matched the beating of a weary heart. I spoke of malice toward none and charity for all in my final public addresses, letting those words hang in the air like smoke from a dying fire. These words echoed through history long after my physical presence had faded from the earth, becoming a quiet guide for those who came after. The task of recording my life fell to those who had served me closely, men who stood by my side through the storm. John Hay and John Nicolay initially refused to begin writing a biography of my life immediately after the tragedy that ended it. They were still grieving themselves and felt unready to undertake such a monumental work while the wounds were still raw. Yet they eventually established themselves as stout guardians of my legacy and memory, protecting the truth from distortion. In 1916, the Hay family donated both the Nicolay copy and the Hay copy to the Library of Congress, placing our shared history in a place of safety. These documents preserved the thoughts and actions of a man who changed the course of history, locking them away from the chaos of the present. The papers rested quietly in the archives for future generations to study and understand, waiting in the silence of the stacks. They offered a window into the mind of a leader who faced impossible challenges, showing the weight of decisions made in the dark. The story of my late life remains a testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming loss, a record of endurance. My spirit endured through the words I left behind and the nation I helped to heal, finding peace in the final silence. The silence of my final days gave way to a legacy that would never fade, a light that could not be extinguished by death. A heavy oak desk sits near the window, its surface worn smooth by years of correspondence and legal work. Soft light from a single tallow candle illuminates the scattered papers and inkwell resting upon the wood. The room smells faintly of beeswax and old leather, creating an atmosphere of calm and focused thought. Outside, the night air is still, and the only sound is the distant hoot of an owl in the trees. This simple space held the weight of a nation, yet remained a place of personal reflection and rest. The shadows dance gently on the walls as the flame flickers in the draft from the chimney. It was here that I found moments of peace away from the demands of the White House. The room stands as a silent witness to the private struggles and quiet triumphs of a great leader. The dust motes float in the beam of light, moving slowly in the warm air. The immediate aftermath of the assassination left a nation in deep mourning and confusion, a vast landscape of grief that stretched from the east to the west. John Hay and John Nicolay initially refused to begin writing a biography of me. Immediately after the assassination, they were still grieving themselves and felt unready to undertake such a monumental historical task. Their hesitation allowed other voices to shape the early public memory of the 16th president, some of whom spoke with less care than I deserved. Early in 1866, historian George N. Bancroft delivered a special eulogy on me that drew sharp criticism from those who knew the truth. Live, John Hay vociferously objected to George Bancroft's characterization of me in a eulogy delivered in 1866, feeling that the words missed the mark entirely. Hay believed the historian had failed to capture the true essence of the late president, missing the quiet strength that defined the man. In a private letter to William Henry Herndon, Hay described me as Republican incarnate, a man of the people and the party. He acknowledged that I defined my political strategy and shaped the character of my administration. Throughout the war years with a steady hand, the president understood that unity required patience and a willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints with genuine interest, even when the words were harsh. Apprentices and young associates learned from my example of integrity and quiet determination in the face of adversity. Watching how I carried the burden, they observed how I managed the immense pressures of leadership without losing my sense of humor or humanity, finding laughter even in the darkest times. Many of these young men went on to serve the nation in various capacities after the war ended, carrying forward the lessons they had learned. Their experiences under my mentorship influenced the next generation of American leaders and public servants, shaping the future of the Republic. The legacy of these relationships extended far beyond the duration of my presidency and the Civil War itself, reaching into the years that followed. The quiet warmth of a candlelit study in Springfield offers a glimpse into the domestic world that supported my public life, a place of refuge. The nation stood on the brink of profound division during the early months of the 19th century, a time of great uncertainty and fear. I assumed the presidency as the country fractured along deep sectional lines. Regarding slavery, a crack that threatened to swallow the whole. My inaugural journey from Springfield to Washington took place between February and late February in 1861, a long and perilous trek through hostile territories. This long travel through hostile territories marked the beginning of a tumultuous era for the federal government, a time of great testing. The political environment remained tense as Southern states seceded from the Union. Before my official inauguration, the air thick with anticipation and dread, war clouds gathered over the Capitol, casting a long shadow over the city and its people. I often retreated into quiet contemplation. When the weight of national crisis became too heavy to bear, seeking solace in silence. My daily habits included long walks through the grounds of the White House to clear my mind, stepping out into the night air. I frequently visited the telegraph office late at night to monitor the progress of the war, reading the reports by the dim light. These solitary moments allowed me to process complex military strategies without the pressure of public scrutiny. Finding clarity in the quiet, I believed that honesty was the foundation of all meaningful human interaction and political discourse. A principle I held dear. I maintained this belief even when it required me to make difficult and unpopular decisions, standing firm in my convictions. My personal struggles were compounded by the tragic loss of my beloved son Willie, a grief that cut deep into my soul. Willie died on February 20th, 1862, just a few months after his 11th birthday, leaving a void that never fully healed. This devastating event changed me, deepening the well of sorrow I carried, yet I continued to serve with a sense of duty that transcended my own personal suffering. The train carried me toward a destiny that no one could fully foresee, moving through the dark with a steady, rhythmic motion. The silence that followed the end of the war settled over the land like a heavy, wet blanket, dampening the shouts of victory and the cries of the wounded. I watched as the nation tried to stitch itself back together, thread by fragile thread, while my own body felt the weight of every stitch I had ever pulled. The train that carried me toward that final destiny moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to measure out the last moments of a life dedicated to a cause larger than any single soul. My last words were spoken with a voice that knew it would soon fall silent, calling for malice toward none and charity for all, a simple plea for peace that echoed long after the air had grown still. Those words did not vanish with the breath that shaped them. Instead, they drifted into the ether, waiting to be caught by ears that had not yet been born. The task of recording what had happened fell to the two men who had stood closest to me, men who had shared the long nights and the heavy burdens of the cabinet room. John Hay and John Nicolay felt a grief so deep it seemed to freeze the ink in their pens, and they refused at first to write the story of my life. They needed time to let the dust of the assassination settle, to let the sharp edges of their own sorrow soften enough to allow for clear thought. Years passed before they could pick up the pen again, transforming their private grief into a public testament that would outlast them both. In 1916, the Hay family placed the original manuscripts into the care of the Library of Congress, where they rest now in a climate of cool, dry air that preserves the fragile paper. The documents lie in a room where the light is soft and the silence is profound, a sanctuary where the thoughts of a leader who faced impossible challenges can be read by anyone who seeks to understand. A surprising fact often escapes notice in the rush of history. The Library of Congress holds more than 10 million items in its collection, yet the weight of those two handwritten volumes feels heavier than all the rest combined. The leather bindings of the old volumes rest on mahogany shelves that smell of aged paper and beeswax polish, a scent that triggers a memory of the study where I once sat by lamplight. The single reading lamp casts a warm, yellow glow over a wooden desk where scholars have bent their heads for generations, tracing the careful phrasing of my own words. Visitors move slowly between the stacks, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets that have absorbed the sound of a century of footsteps. The air remains cool and still, preserving the fragile pages that tell the story of a man who tried to heal a divided house. The immediate aftermath of the assassination left a nation in a state of deep mourning and confusion, a silence that was louder than any battle cry. Early in 1866, a historian named George Bancroft delivered a eulogy that tried to shape the public memory of the 16th president live, but his words felt hollow to those who knew the true man. John Hay objected with a fierce intensity, believing that the historian had failed to capture the essence of the late president, missing the complexity of a soul that held both great faults and great virtues. In a private letter to William Henry Herndon, Hay described the man I was as the Republican Party incarnate, acknowledging that I carried all the strengths and all the weaknesses of my political birth. This admission was not a criticism, but a recognition of truth, a way of grounding the memory in the reality of a human being rather than a statue. Hay later reflected that I was the greatest character since Christ. There I did live. A comparison that seemed too vast for any mortal to claim, yet it solidified a status that would endure for centuries. The physical artifacts of my life found their way into public trust, becoming bridges between the past and the present, while the source text of some records may have been lost or corrupted over time. The physical letters remained intact, offering a window into the mind of a leader who walked through darkness. Historians could still study the handwriting, the slant of the letters, the pressure of the pen that pressed into the paper, revealing the tension of a man who carried the weight of a war. The loss of my son Willie in 1862 had left a permanent scar on my heart, a wound that never fully healed. Yet the legacy of my leadership endured, through the written word and the public memory. The quiet halls of the Library of Congress hold these precious documents where sunlight filters through high windows and illuminates the dust motes dancing in the air. The silence of the room feels heavy with the weight of history, yet it is a peaceful silence, one that invites reflection rather than fear. The story of my late life remains a testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming loss, a reminder that the human spirit can endure even when the body fails. The silence of my final days gave way to a legacy that would never fade, a legacy built on the belief that a house divided against itself cannot stand. The nation moved forward from the ashes of war toward a new and uncertain future, guided by the memory of the man who tried to bind up the wounds of the land. The historical record stands as a testament to the enduring nature of the human spirit, a spirit that refuses to be broken by tragedy or time. The journey from Springfield to Washington in 1861 set the stage for the challenges that lay ahead, a journey that ended in a theater but began a story that continues to this day. The Gettysburg Address remains a testament to the ideals that I fought to preserve, words that are still spoken in schools and courthouses across the land. The documents from the time serve as a bridge between the past and the present live, allowing modern readers to understand the weight of the decisions made during those critical years. The narrative of my life continues to inspire reflection on leadership and sacrifice, reminding those who come after that the path to unity is often long and difficult. The quiet moments of rest and the loud moments of conflict are both part of the same story, woven together into a tapestry that is still being examined. The memory of Lincoln remained a guiding light for those who sought to heal the divisions of the past, a light that has not dimmed despite the passage of so many years. The historical context provides a foundation for understanding the complexities of the American experience, a complexity that is reflected in the pages of the manuscripts kept safe in the archives. The story of this period is one of loss, resilience, and the enduring power of democratic ideals, ideals that continue to shape the world long after the hands that wrote them have turned to dust. The silence of the archives is not empty. It is full of the voices of those who read, study, and remember the legacy of the man who walked the White House gardens in the dark remains a beacon of hope for those who face their own trials. The quiet strength displayed in the face of tragedy endures, a quiet strength that asks for nothing more than to be understood. The story continues, not in the noise of the present, but in the quiet spaces where the past is kept safe and